Hello and welcome to the Rogue Monkey Podcast, the show that shares insightful stories that motivate, inspire and support you on your journey through work and life. It's been a wonderful start to 2022 and we've reached more people this month than any month in our 2-year history. So a huge thank you to everyone who's sharing the show, as it really does help widen the impact that we can have. For our 62nd episode, we're speaking to an actual podcast agency. And our guest today, Sheila Knowles, is the founding director of the BBE Podcast Agency in London. We were absolutely buzzing for this episode as it was our first time in a proper studio where we were both recorded and filmed our interview. If you're yet to check out our YouTube channel, please be sure to subscribe to that, as we will hopefully be filming more face-to-face episodes in the coming months as restrictions ease. BBE Podcast Agency supports podcasts from ideas all the way through to post-production, with the agency becoming the 360-degree support service for podcasters everywhere. From monthly blogs through to online support on their website, the agency really does offer something for podcasters of all levels. It was a super fun episode to record and equally fascinating, as we were learning more about the industry and how it's evolved in recent years. Just before we dive into the episode, a quick note that our monthly community update will be dropping in the next week, so please make sure you're signed up for that, the link for which is in the show notes. So let's get into it and our first ever studio recorded episode. Episode 62, BBE Podcast Agency and Sheila Knowles, exploring the podcast community. Hello Sheila and welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, really good. Really excited to be in a studio for the first time in what feels like nearly 2 years now.
Oh yeah, yes. It feels like COVID has been around for much longer than that. Because every time people say 2 years, I'm like, wait, what year are we actually in now? Was it 23? Is it 2020? Yeah, it's really weird. It's really weird. But yeah, no, thank you for having me and inviting me on the podcast. I think this is my second time being interviewed, so I'm very weird to be like recording during the holiday season as well. So I hope I can do today justice.
No doubt you will.
Yeah.
Could you give our listeners and viewers just a little bit of an introduction as to who you are and kind of what your agency does?
Yeah. So my name is Sheila, the founding director of BBE Podcast Agency, and I created the platform as like a 360 kind of platform to really help, lovers of podcasts and creators of podcasts as well. So what I do is we've got, like a bunch of free podcast guides for anybody that's looking to create, grow, promote their show. I also curate live podcast events, and I did the last one in October of this year, so about maybe a month and something ago, which went really good, and that's how I actually started out the agency. I started it as a live podcast / discussion event platform. I also curate podcast news, so talking about the latest in the podcast industry, audio news, what's going on, but really kind of focusing more on how these news updates can actually help podcast creators, and that's with either growing the shows or planning the shows or with it, promotion. And I also offer some monthly management services. So if somebody's, started a podcast, they need somebody to help them either, manage the social media or manage, different aspects of their show, I kind of step in to provide that service. And I actually sort of revamped my business into an agency this year. As previous to that, it was just sort of like a live podcast event platform. So I'd kind of, curate live podcast events. That was really dope. But I'd actually wanted something a little bit more. So yeah, 2021, I was like, let me create an agency. Let's go for it. And then just turns out people love the idea, love the advice and love everything I'm doing at the moment. So I'm really having a good time.
Well, I don't think anyone could have looked back in the start of 2020 and thought going into 2022 we'd still probably have these challenges, but there has been some incredible opportunities to come out of it for people, where you've had a lot of people start podcasts, YouTube channels and all these sorts of things. So when did the idea first kind of spawn in your mind to think I could actually start anything to all the way to where it is now?
I think for me, it started out, I was at uni. So this is second year of uni. I did sociology with criminology at Kingston University. And during my 3 years there, we had a lot of discussions about, the various different topics and subjects that we were studying about. And at the same time, I was kind of and I think this was sort of second year, I think, I kind of got very tired, very, very tired quickly of the idea of having to go out at, coming back home at like 3, 4 a.m. in the morning. You're tired, you're cold, you're shivering. It's not nice to ride on the buses at night. This was back before like the night tube was everything. And I thought, okay, I actually want to have an event sort of, or something, some kind of like a community thing where we get around, we kind of discuss a few questions and topics just to, educate people and that sort of thing, and just kind of nurture some kind of community spirit. And I just didn't know quite how to do it. And then I think I listened to my first podcast that I listened to, which was, I think, maybe 2016. And one of the guys on the episodes was talking about how he started his events company and what he kind of did. And I thought, oh, that sounds very interesting. And at the same time, as I was listening to their podcast, I thought, okay, I would love to kind of have something similar to this where I'm listening to a podcast, but it's live in a venue. We're having fun. We're talking. We're discussing. We're just having a very good kind of, back and forth flow between the host and the audience. And that's when I thought, oh, okay, let me just kind of, reach out to a few people and see what they would think. So this was back in, this is sort of like a year after I've kind of, been perfecting and thinking about the idea. And I did that. I think I curated my first event with a couple of podcasters. I think this would have been July 2017. An absolute flop. It was terrible. Reason being, so the event didn't actually happen in the end because I'd done everything you do when you're kind of like curating an event. So you look for the venue, the host, the this, the that, the photographers, all of that. Great. I had everything on deck. I had a very good lineup of podcasts on that first show. I think I had like the 3 shots of tequila. They're like super massive now. But at the time they were kind of, still sort of up and coming. And I had a few other people. But the one thing I didn't know was the marketing and the promotions, that you actually do have to push this thing, that even if you've got quality, sort of like a quality panel on your event, you actually still have to push and promote it. I think the venue space that I'd found at the time was, I think capacity was about 200 people. And I thought, okay, great. Yeah, I definitely can fill it out with, the lineup that I have. And in the end, only about maybe like 3 or 5 people actually got tickets. Not great. So literally, I think either the day before the event or on the actual day of the event, I just kind of put out a tweet saying, sorry guys, we're going to have to postpone the event. So I kind of had to take a step back and actually think, okay, this is a great idea, great initiative, but there's quite a lot of work that needs to be done here to make sure that the ticket sales are pushing. Again, kind of sat on the idea again, thought about it over the summer, revamped a few things, changed up the panel, and I did that event again in October 2017. I think I had maybe 20 to 30 people attending, but I thought, okay, this is a good start. Yep. Did it again sort of 2 months later, December 2017, and it just kind of grew and grew. But I think sort of between 2018 and 2019, because I'd sort of curated a few more live events, I thought I actually want to kind of offer a lot more than just the events. I want to do a bit more, in supporting these podcasters to grow and actually putting them on a platform. But I just didn't quite know how to do it because at the time, the climate, particularly for UK podcasters, was that a lot of people were listening. So there were a lot more listeners than there were creators. And I really thought, okay, if I really want to make this happen, how do I do it? How do I go about doing this? How do I go about doing that? I literally had no idea. Then 2019, I thought, okay, I'm going to have to figure out something. I don't know what, but I'm going to have to figure out something. And I kind of, just started jotting down a few ideas, thinking about, maybe running classes on how to host events. I don't know. I wasn't sure about it. Wasn't too keen on the idea, but I thought, maybe, I don't know, somebody might need it. And then I think early 2020, you kind of start hearing a little bit about COVID, but nothing was sort of set in place. And I thought, okay, this COVID thing is a bit scary, but if it means that I can't do events, that means I'm going to be in a really crappy position. And I don't know what to do. And then luckily enough, I think maybe May or June, I sort of started noticing that a lot more UK people were kind of, the paradigm was sort of changing from podcast creators listeners into creators. And I thought, oh, okay, this is interesting. That now a lot more people want actually to they want to raise their voices. They want to be heard. People are creating podcasts left, right, and center. But at the same time, I was still seeing a lot of people kind of stuck on what to do with their podcast, or I've created it. What do I do? Am I on the right path? Am I on the right this? And I thought, okay, maybe I could do something where I help people kind of figure out what they need to do, because I've been doing it for so long, or I've been in the industry for so long. And I thought, okay, maybe it's time I created an agency. Again, I wasn't too sure what the agency would do. So last year I kind of spent majority of lockdown, and I would say maybe from April, May up until I'd say December of last year, just creating a lot of the content that you see on the website at the moment. So that's from the podcast guides. I've got about 12 podcast guides that take you through literally every single aspect of podcasting. So whether it's you're looking for, are you kind of considering to do a video or an audio-based podcast? What do those two kind of entail? Are you kind of stuck on how to turn your idea into a podcast? How do you do that? What are the steps you do? And as I was writing these articles and guides, I made sure that I kind of wrote it with more of a coaching tone, as opposed to I'm just going to throw a few things out here for you, and then you kind of have to figure out the rest. So I've had about 12 guys on there that I actually just sat down and I did. I think, what else did I do? I just did a whole bunch of things, revamped the entire website, the entire sort of look and feel of the brand. And as of March this year, I said, well, hello, this is the new look, the new feel. BBE is now, an agency. We do the news, we do this and that. And I think the podcast news was something that was very new to me as well, particularly because there were a lot more creators than there were listeners in comparison to previous years. I thought, okay, these, the podcast giants, so Apple, Spotify, yada, 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 they were releasing a lot of sort of updates and things that I felt podcast creators need to be aware of for them to actually maximize either growth or monetization or whatever it is that, you wanted to do to have a successful podcast. So I kind of started curating the podcast news. I found the Americans loved the news. The British, not so much, which I still don't know. I don't quite understand why. But I found that the Americans sort of gravitated to the podcast news, the articles, reading them, and would have sort of discussions on Clubhouse. And yeah, it's been a very long journey, but I'm actually happy with the end product that I currently have at the moment. In terms of the agency, and of course, there's still a lot of things that I need to sort of perfect and tweak, but yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and I'm very proud and I'm very glad that kind of feeling and longing for I need to do something more back in 2018, 2019 has actually sort of come out to fruition in this way. Yeah, I'm very happy.
It's really interesting because I have a little think back to when I started in kind of 2020. I had the idea late 2019. And I look back and I remember putting one episode out and thinking, I should do another one. And there was no structure, no plan or anything.
It's always like that.
Well, you do feel like people are like, well, what's your plan? And you go, I don't really know. And I interviewed a guy in my second season, so about my 13th episode. Right. And at that point, he'd started his own podcast and had, a few thousand downloads, and we just had this really interesting conversation about the process of number one, thinking of it, two, planning it, and then actually going out and doing it. We met up early December this year, and his podcast now has 13 million downloads. It's absolutely huge.
That's crazy.
But we were talking about, actually, he said, well, we're still just kind of bouncing from idea to idea and trying to keep it as fresh and organic as possible. So on your journey to get to where we're sitting today, what have been the surprising bits that actually you thought, I didn't realise that, or I hadn't even thought about that when I first started? Was there any things that have just been those wow moments as you've been going along?
I think just kind of seeing that paradigm shift, particularly in the UK, has been something that I found very interesting. That before COVID, a lot of people in the UK were more consumers of podcasts and not so much actually being brave and confident enough to put themselves out there. And then because of COVID, suddenly everyone's a creator. Suddenly everyone has a TikTok or a YouTube channel or something. And I thought, okay, this is very interesting, because is it because now we have a lot more time and we don't have the work responsibilities that we had before that's allowed people to become a lot more creative with their ideas, and all the content they're putting out? Is it a case of, I don't know what, I really don't know what it was, but it's just sort of seeing that shift and people actually sort of, remaining consistent with these new things that they've created that has really sort of shocked me. And I think the other thing as well definitely has to be the difference between the American and the British perspective when it comes to podcasting. Because for some reason, again, it might be because of the size of the nation, but with America, podcasts are huge over there. They are massive. They are like, I'd probably say a good maybe 10 years ahead of us over here. And again, sort of connecting with people, with a lot of these American creators and agencies sort of through Clubhouse, I quickly realized that there's something over here in the UK that we're missing in terms of kind of, harnessing the power and leveraging, what podcasting is as a platform, as a medium. And it's been interesting, and I am actually sort of still up to now trying to sort of figure out what is it that the UK is missing that the Americans have managed to grasp and sort of be able to support their creators to, crazy heights. Because and the reason why I bring that up is because a lot of podcasts kind of, make their money through things like Patreon or crowdsourcing. Whereas over here in the UK, obviously, people do make money off of their Patreon, etc., but it's nowhere near on the same level as the Americans. And I'm kind of doing that research again to try and figure out, is it because we kind of think differently as British people? I don't know. So that's been interesting. I think the other thing that I've sort of wasn't prepared for was just the nature of the unknown. That you can have an idea and you can think, yeah, I've planned it all out. Yep, that looks fine. But when you actually make that move to go ahead and doing it, it's sort of like, well, actually, there's this whole other bunch of things that you didn't know that you had to consider or had to do. That again, I've had to sort of, find out on the journey and just kind of work through it. For instance, even when I got the studio, I just thought, okay, you get the studio, you pay your monthly fee, and that's it. And then the kind of building manager was like, oh, hey, by the way, guys, we have this thing called the building rates, and you have to pay the the business rates. And I thought, what's that? What does that mean? I'd already planned out the finances for the rest of the year and kind of moving on to next year. But what is this new thing? But it's just sort of dealing through all those things and saying, okay, I'm not going to stop the journey just because I'm being faced by, some of these new things that are unknown to me. Because a lot of the times, and the reason why a lot of people don't actually create podcasts is because once they kind of have the idea on paper and they're ready to go move into onto the next step, and they come across some sort of hurdle, it's okay, no, I can't do it now. I'm not going to go ahead with it. I'm not going to go through with it. So the whole business rates thing just kind of threw me off. And I was like, oh, I didn't expect that to happen. Interesting. I think also the other thing that I did not expect as much was for there to be some kind of equal, maybe slightly more male podcast creators sort of coming out. And again, through the pandemic, that I noticed a lot of, men have come out and they've created podcasts with their friends and their colleagues and this, that, and the other. And I think it's kind of equating podcasting to talking, which men apparently don't do, according to, gender stereotypes. And kind of seeing that shift in seeing men actively, talk on topics that, you wouldn't normally hear from, or them, talking about sports and doing all of these things was something that was it wasn't necessarily new to me because I did know that obviously men have podcasts and things, but it was just the exponential growth of actually seeing this on a day-to-day basis in comparison to the female creators that I found. Interesting. This kind of totally defeats a gender stereotype that men don't really like talking about feelings. They don't like talking about this, which has been very special and very interesting to see. And I really hope that, this kind of culture, kind of keeps growing to kind of allow people to, step a little bit out of the comfort zone and out away from, stereotypes that, we're kind of used to seeing. And again, I've seen a lot more kind of Muslim podcasters coming out and talking about what it's like for, Muslim men or women growing up in Western countries, or, people fighting for social justice. So it's really great that to see that there's now a lot more diversity within the podcasting sphere, and it's not your normative, entertainment, celebrity, comedy. It's a lot more, so there's a lot more depth to it now, which I really, really love.
And I think that's, we talked about how, almost not having that plan and following it as it comes. And I think that's something I can certainly relate to, because I think if I think back to the first 8 episodes that I did, I was very much sitting in my comfort zone. I was speaking to people audio only. I didn't use video at that point.
Yeah.
Would only talk to people that I knew reasonably well. Would have quite a very, guess, a narrow conversation with them. Whereas I think now, by the time I got to about my 4th or 5th season, we were talking about men's mental health. We were interviewing people who had recovered from cancer. We were having some really uncomfortable discussions. But actually, you think if you can get to a point where you're confident enough with your platform, there's almost no issue that you can't bring to the fore. And I think that's where podcasting has really leaped forwards, because traditionally a lot of the barriers to entry are overcome. You know, as long as you've got a phone, you know, and access to the internet to a point, you can get started. And once you've done a few, you're kind of like, I remember one of my friends saying to me, he said, your biggest challenge is to get to 8 episodes. And I said, why? And he said 90% of podcasters won't get to 8 episodes.
They won't.
Get past that point.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, because obviously you deal with so many different podcasts, what's it been, I guess, like your overview of it all coming together? Because you see every different, I guess, channel, theme, subject area that they work in. What's that kind of been like seeing, I guess, from a distance, an overview of the podcasting world as it's gone mad in the last 12 months?
Yeah. I'm actually really excited for what this medium is going to do for people. I think at the minute we are sort of still in the very early stages, although it's not really early stages because podcasting has been around since like 2003 or something crazy like that. So it's not necessarily new, but in terms of the growth and in terms of, you know, the kind of the diversity and the range of kind of topic areas and things that people discuss on their podcast, I think there definitely is that range. And I like the fact that people are not sort of holding back. And as you've said, you know, with men's mental health, a lot more podcasts have come out, you know, with people talking about men's mental health. What does that mean? You know, how has COVID impacted that? Whereas previously, when we're talking about mental health, we don't really talk about the men because they're good. They're okay. We don't have to worry about them. They're big and strong. So it's very good to actually see people coming out of their comfort zones in that way and kind of, like you've said, being comfortable with the uncomfortable and talking about it. I definitely think that that's the route that podcasting is going to take moving forward. The people are going to be a lot more, you know, comfortable, getting comfortable with those uncomfortable topics and questions. And I think it's going to be one of the greatest mediums that are going to be teaching people a lot of things that they should know or should have known or, you know, weren't taught in school. I mean, you have podcasts that talk about like how to tie your tie and you're just listening to somebody telling you how to tie a tie. Very weird. But it works for some people. And I think it's going to be a medium that is going to kind of give a lot more people the voice to actually speak on what's going on, what's happening, or what has happened. And I think it's just kind of having that, there's a word I'm looking for, sort of taking away these institutions and what the institutions teach you and then kind of actually listening into those authentic voices to actually hear those experiences. Because again, when we look back at, I studied psychology and looking at kind of, you know, studies that included men in these mental health studies, there were very few men in those studies. Whereas now there's a lot more people kind of talking about men's mental health. So it's sort of changing the narrative, changing these kind of, you know, stereotypes that we know of, you know, groups in society that I think overall with all the podcasters that I've been working with and I've seen is definitely going in that trajectory of they're going to be the next inspirations. They're going to be the next, you know, community speakers, not necessarily leaders, because a lot of people on podcasts don't actually step into it to lead a certain community or to be the face of that. But it's just more so that speaker of the community that will obviously speak out for it. Of course, it means there's going to be, you know, the rebuttal, the other side of it, where you're going to have a lot of people coming out with a whole bunch of nonsense and crap. Excuse my English. You know, but just keeping it very real. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of people are going to benefit from podcasting because this medium really gives a lot of people that kind of that global influence to actually reach somebody in a country that is completely different to them that they probably wouldn't have been able to, or maybe even learn things that they will never have had, you know, the chance to learn. And I'm kind of particularly thinking of, you know, people in, say, third world countries that they may not have necessarily the scope to go out and seek, I don't know, mental health support, or, you know, these services may not readily be available to them. But listening to a podcast, you know, an episode of, I don't know, say a psychologist or somebody that works in, you know, the mental health system, they may learn a few things that they can then take on and do themselves or practice themselves, or maybe offer that to the family. So I think it's just that global influence that is going to really help a lot of people. And I am very excited to see what this medium is going to be in the next 5-10 years. As you've said, it's grown crazily over the past 2 years, and I do really hope that the growth, stays on that trajectory. And I'm excited.
I think there's a real appetite for it, and I think you see it almost at the social events. So whether it's going out with your friends, meeting up with family, Christmas, all of those sorts of things, and you have a conversation, and suddenly it sparks. I listened to an interview about that or a podcast about that. You signpost them to that. They then tell someone else, and that's something I've found is certainly with my show that I've evolved into speaking to lots of different careers. This conversation today, and almost pulling back the curtain and saying to young people out there, you can do this. It is possible. It doesn't matter, interviewing people on TV or in this space like we are today, and actually saying this is what we do. This is how we do it. You can do that too. And I think for young people traditionally, going through, a standard education system, if you like, that says this is what you do at school, then you might go to college, then you go to university, and then you pop out the end and get a career that you stay in for 40 years. Whereas you've now suddenly got people pretty much from any walk of life going, this is what I do, this is how I do it. And if you want to get started, drop me an email and get little tips. And the way people engage through social media, you can reach, I guess, a much wider audience, but also the audience can reach people perhaps that they never were able to reach before. So that must be really interesting for you to facilitate that for all these different shows that you support.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one podcast in particular, the Riff Raff and Nora podcast, is one of my clients, and his podcast is sort of strictly around talking about mental health, but really in particular looking at it from the scope of some white male in Ireland who has suffered from mental health, who has gone through all the treatments, and he's gone through all that, through all the entire journey. And so he actually created that podcast to help other men that may be suffering from mental health. And I love his show because even when I listen to it, because he kind of invites on people that work directly, with, people with mental health or previous mental health sufferers that have then sort of gone through treatments and now are supporting other people in similar situations. And listening to some of the episodes and some of the tips and things that they offer for people is fascinating to me, because when I find myself sort of panicking, I think back to that one episode when somebody said, do this, this and that. And I sort of practice that, and I find myself, I'm like, oh my God, the stuff that I actually listened on that episode actually works in real life. Which I think, like you said, is kind of that global reach and just sort of reaching out to new people and helping them and supporting them. And I don't think any other platform or any other medium has done this in the way that podcasting has done. And in some way, I'm kind of grateful for COVID for doing that, because I really don't think that had COVID not happened, I don't think podcasting would have generated as much interest as it did. Last year. I've
definitely listened to a lot of feedback on different podcasts to say that's what's helped them through the COVID period, whether it was when they were going out on walks or just connecting with people in the same situation. Because when you have, I guess, quite famous people coming to the fore on podcasts and YouTube lives and whatever else it is and saying, look, I'm at home like everybody else and I'm struggling, that can be quite powerful for young people who are struggling to hear and actually go, oh, okay, I'm not in this alone. Even if you are in a flat on your own, away from everyone, actually the digital way we're connecting with people and sharing those stories can be really, really powerful.
Yeah.
The thing, I want to look back a little bit, I guess, to what we're doing here, because one of the big parts, I guess, on the podcasting journey is developing that resilience to keep going and overcome the challenges that come with it. So on your journey, I know you just about got everything set up and ready to go here, and then you had a little speed bump you had to get over. So if you can just take us through that.
So I think I sourced the studio, the space in, I think maybe March, April of this year. And I was meant to be moving in towards the end of June, so early July. Everything was nice and ready to go. Paperwork is filled in. I think at this point, I'd actually set up everything in the studio as well. So the lights, the mic, the table, everything was nice and set up. And I went home, as you do, very proud of, my little studio up and running. Everything is looking good. And then I get a message from one of the studios next door. And I said, okay. I looked at the message, I just put it away. The message read that your studio is flooding. You need to get here as soon as possible. I was on a call at the time with a website design intern that I had on at the time. I looked at the message and I just put my phone the other way, because in my head, I thought I didn't read that message correctly. I saw flooding in your studio, get here now. I thought, no, this cannot be happening. I've only just been in 2 weeks. What do you mean it's flooding? And we didn't have a good summer this year, being honest with you. It was very rainy, very cold, just disgusting. So I thought, no, it can't be. And when I finished the call with the intern, I picked up my phone and looked at it again, and he said it's flooded. I thought, oh my God, no. Because at the time I'd had as you can see, some of the microphones on the floor. We've got wires and things, cables and things. And I thought, if this is flooded, that means everything that I have right now is just going to go to the bin. And I don't know how to deal with it. So what I did, I just kind of, again, I live sort of pretty close to the studio. So I got myself down here. But luckily, by the time I'd actually got here, the building managers, they had soaked out a lot of the water from the space. I will show you the road console box so you can see how high the water was. Okay. But it was high, and I was out of it. Obviously, I kicked up a fuss and I said, this cannot happen. What is going on? Because of, it just wasn't great. And it turns out that there's a water tank behind that wall over there. And because it'd been raining too much, something happened to the valves in the tank. I don't know all that stuff that they were talking about, but something happened to the valve in the tank. It dipped, and that just literally gushed out all the water all over the studio floor and space. Obviously, for somebody who's just pretty much opened a studio as an extension of the agency, been here 2 weeks, all my equipment is brand new. I was just in absolute panic mode. But the good thing is that the building managers, they were very understanding, and we kind of came to an agreement. But it's just kind of having that thing where it's sort of like, okay, now I kind of have the perfect picture of what I want, and then this happens. What the crap? But I'm really, really happy that these guys were very, very supportive in terms of what they were going to do. Kind of getting measurements sorted out for the door to make sure this doesn't happen again. It did happen again, because it flooded twice. I think the second time wasn't as bad as the first time. But again, they just kind of, did what they had to do to make sure that it just doesn't happen again, period. Which is really good. But it wasn't the greatest, I'll be very honest with you. I think that 48 hours was just absolutely manic and mental, because I thought, what do you mean it's flooded? And I was actually lucky that those guys over there in the studio next door were the ones that alerted me, because I don't think the building managers would have told me that my studio's flooding. I don't think they would have. I really don't think so. So I'm grateful that they actually did that for me. Bless them. But yeah. I think that's probably been one of the biggest hurdles I've probably had to face in the journey so far. Aside from this and the tickets not selling for my first event, I think those two definitely have marked a special place in my head. But it was, it wasn't great. It wasn't great 48 hours.
So let's look ahead then. We've got a fresh year ahead and hopefully much more positivity.
Yes.
If you were giving advice to, let's forget the world of podcasting. Let's just talk for a business, having been through that process yourself now of starting, overcoming the hurdles, things not go right and all of those challenges. What would be your biggest lesson that you've taken specifically to business to start with? And then we'll ask about podcasting.
I think it's the being able to actually be prepared for the unknown. I think that's the one thing to just always bear in mind, that you have to be prepared for the unknown. You can have everything ready, the paperwork, everything is just looking absolutely perfect, but there's always going to be that thing that pops up out of nowhere, and you will never see it coming. You will never be prepared for it, because that's literally just the nature of business. It pops up. But I think the biggest thing again is to just knowing how to deal with that, and not to kind of just throw a strip and just think, well, okay, if this thing has popped up, that means that this is the end of the world and I need to just shut everything down. And just really kind of understanding that you're going to have a lot of unknowns thrown at you, for sure, 100%. And again, with the event that I tried to do sort of however many years ago it would be now, again, it was something that you had that came up. Didn't realize I'd only sell 3 tickets out of 200, but things happened. That didn't mean I had to stop, because 4 years later now I have a studio. I have a full-fledged agency. And again, even with the studio flooding as well, that could have literally been me saying, right, that's it, I'm done. I'm going to scrap the idea of the studio. I'll just keep it to the online agency stuff. Let me just keep going with that. But again, I just kind of pushed through that. And I think leaning on people that are sort of around you for support and help is something that is very important. Of course, 90% of the time, they may not be able to help you or to support you through that because it's your business. It's not you and them. Of course, unless you have involved them in it, but it's having that kind of support system whereby you have somebody or people that you can talk to. I mean, I spoke to one of my brothers, and he kind of gave me really great advice and said, just speak to building managers, get to some sort of agreement, figure out what's going to happen when the studio flooded, which was really good. And at the time, I'll be very honest, I thought, when the studio flooded for the second time, I thought, what is the point? This must be a message from somebody up there in the air telling me, get rid of the studio. But, he kind of spoke, my brother kind of spoke to me and said, you just got to keep it going. Don't worry about it. It's just, it's just a little niggle in the way, you can get over it. So being prepared for the unknown, knowing how to deal with it, or kind of, trying to figure out how you can deal with it is also a good way of really pushing forward in business. But also just make sure that your finances are either planned or you have some sort of idea where you're going to generate revenue when you're not generating revenue. Because that's one thing that a lot of people forget. They think, oh yeah, I have this idea, sounds very dope and great in my head. So that means that if I put it out to the public, people are going to eat it up just as quickly as, just as much as I love the idea, when in actual fact, you have to do a lot for people to even turn your way, to even reach in their pocket or get their bank card out, for them to actually go ahead and tap it, or actually for them to make that transaction. And it's just making sure that if you are sort of looking to go into freelancing or to quit your full-time job, just make sure you have enough money saved to either cover the business or yourself as you're going on this journey. If it is that you need to seek out loans or additional assistance and support from any other organizations that can support, do that. But just really look at those finances before you even make that move, because you never know. Again, things come, pop out of nowhere, and you're going to find yourself spending an extra couple of quid fixing this or getting that sorted, getting this sorted. And if you haven't planned for it, or you don't have some sort of idea what to do, then you're going to find yourself in some hot water, to put it that way.
So what about with, supporting all these different shows in the podcast world? What would be your one message to either people that are thinking of starting a podcast or have kind of started it, done those first few steps to get going, and then are like, right, where do I go next to it? What's your one tip to those people out there? I
would definitely say, and this is one thing that people don't actually know, or maybe they do, but they just sort of don't want to think about it, is that for your first maybe year, 2 years, even 3 years, you should really just concentrate it on building some sort of community, or just kind of, having those loyal listeners coming back to your show. Because it is those loyal people or that community that you build on your podcast that is going to propel you to wherever it is that you see your podcast going to. And if you kind of sit there sort of constantly clicking on the analytics and saying, okay, I have 10 downloads today, I have 10 tomorrow, that is going to drive you crazy. And you're going to sort of you're going to kind of, you're going to get so lost in the numbers that is going to translate in how you feel about the podcast. Because as you said, a lot of people drop their podcast before they even reach that 10th episode, because they think, oh, well, I've only got 10 downloads on that. I've only got 20 on that. Why should I even bother? When actually those 20 downloads in 2-3 months time, that could turn into 100 very easily. But if you don't actually sort of have that time to devote to your podcast and to doing that, it's just not going to work at all. And I think that's one thing that people really need to take into consideration. And a lot of people do ask, so how do I develop a community around my podcast? How do I do that? And it's all in sort of knowing who your audience is. So if you have a particular podcast that you want to talk about, really know who your audience is. What do they like listening to? What do they look like? Who are they? Have that profile to make sure that the things you're going to be talking about on your podcast really resonate with them. Because it doesn't make sense to, not mention or talk about some of those things on a podcast that people will be interested in listening to, just because you don't think it could quite fit. And I think that's one thing that, again, a lot of people forget, and they just kind of go into the podcasting thing willy-nilly thinking, yes, my show has no structure, it has no message to it, but just come and listen, which is great. And it could work for the first couple of episodes, but if you want that growth, You need to kind of just, maintain that consistency and, make tweaks and changes as to where you see fit. But just really making sure that you kind of devote the first at least 2 years to growing your community and your audience. And I'm actually currently working with an influencer. He's a model. He's got about, maybe I'd say 70 to 80,000 followers on Instagram, so a massive platform. But even for someone like him, getting a podcast off of the ground where he's having sort of similar high numbers in terms of the listenership and the followership, it's not that much. And rather, the people who are constantly, listening, retweeting on Twitter, commenting on the Instagram, are people that he's actually built that community with. So people that he actually knows in his personal life, as opposed to, random people that he doesn't know. Of course, that doesn't mean that that's going to be the trajectory of the podcast in the long term. But it just goes to show that you can be an influencer. You can have so many, social numbers and, followings behind you. But if you haven't actually taken the time out to devote the consistency to building a community, people will come in and they'll listen to your podcast as a one-off thing, and then that's it. Which is great, for you to, for the listenership to keep going up, but then you want that consistency. You want people to actually return back, and you also want them to share your episodes and things like that. And so yes, it's kind of understanding that first 2 years, just build your listenership, build that community, and just make sure that people understand who you are, why you created the show, and the rest will follow suit. I think that for me is the biggest message. And I think the other thing that I do want to touch on just very lightly is, like I mentioned before, really understanding your audience and actually creating a profile. And this goes into the podcast marketing, whereby if you have a podcast, but you haven't taken the time out to actually fully understand the people that will be listening to it, you're going to be missing or potentially missing out a lot of listeners if you don't actually know who these people are, what they like to listen to, what music concerts they like to go to, what TV shows they like listening to. Because when you start talking about these things on your show, even if the people aren't necessarily interested in the overall theme of your podcast, because they've seen you talking about or giving a review to that music concert, or I don't know, the Christmas EastEnders episode, they'll think, oh, I like EastEnders. Let me go tune in. Let me see what this person has to say. And before you know it, that person who has now seen you, I don't know, on social media or wherever else talking about that thing that they like, that person may then sort of become a loyal listener. But until you actually know your audience to that stage, you may be missing out a lot of listeners. So really know your audience, literally create a profile and think about, is it men, is it women? What age group? What do they like listening to? What do they like talking about? What platforms are they likely to be on? And even when it comes to the platforms that they are most likely to be on, and I'm talking about social media platforms, how do they use these platforms? Because if you notice, the way people use TikTok, it's kind of different to how they use Reels. It's sort of different to how they use Twitter. Very different to how Twitter and Instagram work, even if those two platforms are, very popular. And understanding, okay, do I put hashtags on the Twitter, or is it better to use that on the Instagram? Is it better for me to, create a thread on Twitter, or is it better for me to have the carousel slide on Instagram? So really understanding how those little things work, because again, that is what is going to drive your audience to you, by really making sure that if you are promoting on these different platforms, you kind of have an idea as to how the people on these platforms work, maybe the terminology they use on there, and those sorts of things. Because until you know that, again, you'll be missing out the listeners. So have that profile and spend the first 2 years at the very least, just building your community.
There's some fantastic advice there, and it's quite timely as I'm about to tick over into my third year in the spring, so that's exciting for me.
Yeah.
I've got one question now to pull it all together that loops back to you personally. So if you could go back to pre-university, before you dived into this world, what would your message to your younger self be?
Oh gosh, I think it probably would be not to give up. I think that would be my message, and I think that's one thing that I did. One thing that's been sort of consistent throughout my entire life, that I've always told myself not to give up. And even when I went to uni, I think originally I wanted to go to like Roehampton Uni or something, and I can't remember why I didn't get in. I don't know. But even before that, I'd always told myself that you kind of, you can't just let go. You have to keep going. You have to strive for better. And I think it goes back to my grandma. She used to call me her little professor when I was younger. because she said I was really smart, and she just always nurtured me to kind of to believe that I'm smart. Not just think it, but also believe it. And she'd always remind me that, oh, you're so smart. Look at you. You can read, you can write, you can do this. And so having that positive memory in my head just sort of kept me going. And at each and every single moment in life where I've sort of had a few hurdles here and there, I just said, okay, this is the dream. This is the goal. You just can't stop right now. Just keep going. I think that's what I would tell myself. Just keep going regardless of the hurdles. Keep going. As long as it makes sense, just don't stop.
That's a nice way to pull it all together. And I think back to, episode 24 on my show, I interviewed the captain of the Red Arrows, the display team.
Oh, wow.
And I said to him at the end, because he didn't come from a pilot's background, none of his family had ever been in the military before, grew up in East London. And I said, what would you say to your younger self? And he said, never give up, you can do it.
Oh, wow,
so
there you go.
So there you go. That's nice to hear that come up twice so far.
Yeah.
Sheila, it's been absolutely fantastic. We're going to include the links to the agency and everything else you're up to in the show notes so people can follow on. Yeah. But have a fantastic start to 2022, and thank you for sharing some time with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I mean, I don't get these as often, and it's very, like I said before, it's very weird getting into this because I'm used to sort of seeing people do it or giving tips to people who are hosting and interviewing other people. So no, it's been great. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Enjoy the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. And don't forget, we've got a back catalogue of content that goes all the way back to January 2020, including fighter pilots, Olympic champions, TV presenters, and inspiring authors. We'd really appreciate it if you can give us a quick rate and review, however you're joining us today. And if you don't want to miss out on any future episodes, make sure you hit subscribe. Our community update drops once a month, and we've got some great guest content being added, so be sure to sign up for that. And finally, we're all about inspiring and supporting as many people as possible. So if you can share this episode with one person that you think would enjoy it, that would be really, really cool. Thank you again for joining us for another episode of the Rogue Monkey Podcast.